So on Wednesday, the Mr. McMahon documentary got released on Netflix, and I thought I would make a video kind of talking through each episode, what I thought of the episode, and my original plan was to kind of not go through what happens in the episode bit by bit and just give an overall sense of the video, of the episode, sorry, but I kind of fell apart near the end. Like the first two are kind of good overall things, and then I kind of get into what happens more throughout the thing instead, just because there's just a lot. And yeah, I just thought I'd come on, give my opinions on stuff, episode by episode, and yeah, just give my opinion and my thoughts on it. So yeah, I'm Leo, this is Wrestling Retrospective, and let's talk about the Vince McMahon documentary. So, episode 1 is called Junior, and for me it's like the nice one, the one that goes through the history quite well, and Vince is kind of painted in a good light. I thought it was a great way to set up for the documentary and the way things were going to be like. I think it kind of, set them, like, it had a mold to it, and it kind of went through that really well throughout. I thought that the mentioning that, like, the recent stuff with allegations weren't going to be massively going into stuff as it all came out after the documentary was recorded was really good. They reminded us, like, I think it was the first episode, the third episode, and the last episode, and then they kind of went into it a little bit at the end of the last episode. I thought it was really cool. It showed that, like, people that aren't keeping up with it, like wrestling fans and stuff, like we are all the time, that, like, it wasn't going to be covered massively throughout the documentary, which I thought was really cool, and, like, just a good indication, like, for the people who were probably expecting that to be all about the documentary, to be all about that stuff. Overall wise, I thought for fans who didn't know about the stuff and, like, about the history of wrestling and stuff like that, I thought it was a great showing of Vince McMahon as a person and his history and kind of how he got into the industry and all that stuff, and kind of, I don't know, how the history evolved and all the territories and stuff like that. I thought it was a really good showing. But for people that do know, I thought that the first part gave that humanity feel to Vince McMahon as a person, and said for his, like, for me, stuff that we didn't know, like, I don't know a lot about Vince McMahon, like, really early stuff, so this was really insightful for me. But, like, I know there are people that would have preferred, like, this just because they don't know anything, like myself, or people that did know, they got a little bit more, which I thought was really cool. Again, more positive stuff about the documentary for episode 1. The historical events, like the lawsuits against WWE by various presenters and journalists and stuff, I thought that they were explained really well and kind of were run through within a decent amount of time where they were understood. They went through what happened and kind of the resulting afterwards, and then they kind of showed the text at the end. So I thought that was like a good way of clearing everything up very quickly. The rise of Hulk Hogan, I thought was really interesting. Hulk Hogan I know as someone who, like, doesn't put people over and is a massive racist. And that's kind of how I know Hulk Hogan, just because of, like, he wasn't really around much when I started watching. He was around at times and then wasn't around at all, and then there was a whole taking him out the Hall of Fame stuff. So seeing all this kind of build up for him, I thought was interesting for me. And then the kind of behind the scenes slash the results of WrestleMania 1 and what it did to the industry, I thought was shown really well. And kind of, like, everyone knows, like, what WrestleMania is, so showing, like, a quick history of that again would have been really insightful for fans who don't really know much about WrestleMania. For me, this, like, kind of, I kind of do this for, like, every episode, but it kind of falls off near the end. But, like, some highlighted quotes that I had that I'll just read straight from my notes was Triple H saying that people that weren't fans would say fans are stupid for not realizing it's not real, but actually it's people smart enough to accept it's a show and engage and love it. I thought it was a really cool way of summing up, like, the whole it's fake and stuff that people will argue, and people will continue to argue until probably the end of time, because wrestling, I feel like, will always be a thing. But yeah, that's a really good response. Chris Jericho did a response ages ago to it, where, like, saying about the term fake, and I can't remember what it is, but I remember sharing it around social media when I first saw it. And then I thought, like, the biggest quote of the episode was, like, the first thing that was said by Vince McMahon, which was, like, I wish I could tell you the real stories. This, for me, it was incredibly interesting, just because, like, as a first impression, it just says, I'm gonna lie, and I'm not going to tell you everything. I'm going to hold stuff back, like even from the get-go, which I feel like will put a damper on some people's perspective of the documentary. But like, it's a kind of very Vince McMahon thing to do as people who know what Vince McMahon is like, almost. But yeah, I'd say it was a very interesting way to start the documentary, as from him, just as that quote goes. But as overall, episode 1 I thought was really good. It kind of cleared the history up really well. Hogan, WrestleMania 1, Vince himself kind of breaking into the industry, and his personal life I thought was covered really well. As I said, it was like a positive way to start, like with people who knowing that it's going to get dark fairly quickly, which it didn't, to be fair. I thought the darker parts did eventually come along, just wasn't as quickly as everything else. But yeah, we'll move on to episode 2. So episode 2 was called Heat. This, for me, was like the first sign of negativity. They go through the reasons why WrestleMania 2 didn't really work out, and how WrestleMania 3 became such a success, and how the kind of build-up of Hogan versus Andre and why they went that way. I did think that the more funnier parts of this documentary, of course, was when everyone, like, well, not everyone, but multiple people like Vince and Hogan and Pritchard and I think somebody else were all saying how it was 93,000, and it cut straight to Dave Meltzer, who said it was actually 78,000, which I thought was quite comical, the way they did that, and we would eventually see on that they do this way more often, and it's quite laughable. And the fact that they'll say that people will give one side of opinion and then they'll completely go the other way with everybody else. It's quite funny. But after that, they go and take a massive negative turn, where we have the process of the steroid trial, and kind of, if I thought for the time scale that they had, knowing that like they're not going to be able to go through everything in a massive amount of depth or put a massive amount of time on something, I thought that the coverage of the steroid trial was brilliantly done. Just as far as like the amount of information you get so quickly, but how easy it is to retain as well. I thought that I don't know, it was insightful as for someone who doesn't really know much about the steroid trial. Again, way before my time of watching wrestling. I was probably not even born or very, very young at the time. The Hogan saying like people were taking steroids like people going to Starbucks is very, very funny, and something that is like not the same and not a great thing to say. Vince McMahon wearing the neck brace, definitely a sympathy thing, like no doubt in my mind. Says, for me, as someone, again, no context of what happened and have seen the pictures of Vince McMahon in the neck brace, it came across like a sympathy thing. So I had my opinion down on that even beforehand. But yeah, this episode really starts to paint Vince in like an awful light. They very, very lightly bring up Jimmy Snuka and his girlfriend being murdered or killed or whatever at the time. And there's just like this really weird quote from Snuka about like hell and stuff. It's very uncomfortable to watch, knowing like what we know now, and saying how like Vince maybe had some powers to turn that around so Snuka didn't get found guilty for it or something. It was not great. And then when we get to the young boys sex scandal allegations stuff, oh, it's grim. And like the alligator rape, alligator rape of Rita Marie. Vince's awful quote of the statute of limitations have run out, I thought was just grim. Like, to be fair, like that kind of proves that he did it. Like, without him saying that he did it, it's awful. Jimmy Hart saying like, I'm trying to be cautious, I don't know what people want you to know, they don't know what they want out. Again, it's just like, what do we not know? Like, it just sounds awful. And then Tony Atlas was like the worst. Like, I'll talk more about Tony Atlas in like my overall review of the documentary, but Tony Atlas laughing hysterically at just the premise of reporting him getting groped and molested by Pat Patterson, because he knows that he would have been fired over Pat, is awful and disgusting from Vince McMahon. And just like, it spoke volumes for like what these people were going through at the time, and like, yeah, it just was a really uncomfortable feel about it. But the shift kind of happened again, where like we went from really negative to like completely off subject, where they talked about Hulk Hogan's transition out of wrestling, and then kind of, well, then not out of wrestling, but like he went to do films, and then he went into contact with WCW, and then they kind of did like a very quick version of what they go more deeply into for the next episode, which is like the rise and takeover of WCW. And yeah, I think like it was interesting for what it was, like as we were getting more in the third episode anyway, so like it was decent, you know. I haven't got much more to say about that. Quote of the episode for me, I think it was something Shoemaker, the guy, I think it was like an author or journalist or something, saying nothing that any wrestler or that anybody involved in wrestling tells you should be taken as fact, or should be regarded as fact, sorry. I didn't really understand why he said that. Like, it really didn't make sense to me. It came across like it was someone who was very bitter towards wrestling and only sees wrestling as a negative thing after the recent Vince McMahon stuff. Like, I don't know, it came across very, very bitter, and like, I don't think that's the case, as like, you know, there's plenty of reliable people within wrestling who give out information and all this other stuff. Like Dave Meltzer, for example, is involved in wrestling just because like that's his whole thing, and you know, he is a reliable source. Sean WhatsApp's a reliable source, as well as people within the WWE. Like, you know, I don't think anybody involved in wrestling or anybody in wrestling is like the whole, I don't know, it came across all sour and fucking, you know, like you need to grow up a little bit. And I thought it was like one of the lesser, I don't know, one of the more crappier parts of the documentary was when they kind of kept cutting to him as he just kind of seemed like a bitter human being. But yeah, other than that, as I said, the episode overall was very dark and very negative towards Vince and kind of stuff he's hiding and like stuff that he maybe like did, but was, I don't know, I'm kind of losing my words a bit, but it's just kind of a very damper episode, but like a good setup for the feeling you're going to be getting later on when we get to like the really shitty stuff. So as I said, again, really good for information. Covered WrestleMania 3 really well. Like the steroid trial was done brilliantly for the amount of time they had. And yeah, as I said, it just was a starter feeling of how shitty things were properly going to get. Episode 3 was the very appropriately named Screwjob. It started with a story and reasoning behind Vince screwing Wendy Richter for the ladies' championship, they said at the time, which sounded really weird compared to women's championship. Something I wasn't even aware even happened. But I also liked how we got like both perspectives. We got Wendy's perspective of everything and Vince's, as we kind of start her off, knowing that we like, well, it's kind of like a good way to start when people who know about Montreal know about where this episode is 100% going and was going to finish at. Yeah, but they finished up with the rest of the steroid trial stuff and kind of moved on very swiftly onto the rise of WCW, like I talked about before. Yeah, they talked about how the steroid trial kind of affected everything business-wise, and kind of that's how WCW took over the Monday Night Wars, really, and how like the decision became for Nitro to become a thing. I thought it was really cool, and they kind of went to Bret Hart, and man, I really don't like Bret Hart, mainly because I don't really like him as a wrestler. I find him very boring as a wrestler, but I know a lot of people will hate that I've said that, but that's my opinion. But also, he is a fucking personality vacuum. Like, he has the same emotion for everything. I think the biggest emotion he showed through this whole thing was just when he swore, and that was it. Like, I felt, so when they were talking about somebody replacing Hulk Hogan and they went with Bret Hart, I couldn't believe it. I assumed they were going to go with Shawn Michaels or say Shawn Michaels, and you know, they went with Bret, and Vince said like he didn't have a lot of charisma, but he had enough. Like, no, he has no charisma, does Bret Hart. He's so serious all the time. Like, you know, I really don't get it. Whereas Shawn is a entertainment, like, spectacular almost. Like, he's so good at this kind of stuff, and I know it will show more in the Attitude episode, like, which is next on. But yeah, like 100% Shawn Michaels was the one to replace Hulk Hogan, not Bret Hart. But yeah, the telling of WCW from a kind of non-WWE side, like, if that makes sense. So like the stuff on the network is very WWE creating documentaries about WCW, whereas here Netflix were like a mutual side. so they kind of got to tell the story more. And I don't know if it was the story more, it just seemed more intuitive, and it felt like Bischoff could be more honest about how stuff happened and kind of show how he's really feeling on a big platform for a documentary. Whereas I felt like, I just, how like WWE are, they'll kind of simmer over stuff like they were the almighty thing. But yeah, I thought it was really cool the way they covered the Monday Night Wars early in, and Vince saying that like the territories and kind of how he did the territories is very different to how Bischoff and Turner were doing WCW and taking all his talent. How they were very different. It's very naive of him to say, in my opinion, as they're exactly the same. And I'm sure a lot of people have said that. I've seen videos, a lot of people have said that as well. And yeah, they went through the story of the NWO and Hulk Hogan's heel turn very quickly, but very well. I thought they covered it. I mean, I know the whole story behind Hulk Hogan's thing anyway. But again, for people that don't know, it cleared it up very, very well. And yeah, the the constant Eric Bischoff saying, was it 83 weeks, 84 weeks, 83 weeks? Was it 83 weeks? I found that very laughable. I thought it brought that comedy element to the documentary. I thought it was really cool. But yeah, then it moved on to the Montreal Screwjob, which again was covered very well. Probably the best storyline within the company covered in the documentary was the Montreal Screwjob and kind of everything that happened with that. I don't know. They showed some really cool behind the stage stuff. Behind the scenes stuff that I hadn't seen before. Like, I've seen the Dark Side of the Ring documentary on the Screwjob, and they kind of expanded that even more, even in shorter time. They showed stuff with like Bret Hart's wife saying stuff, and yeah, it was really cool. It's probably, again, one of the best parts of the documentary was it covering the Montreal Screwjob, and it then transitioned very well into like what the next episode will be about, which was like the rise of the Vince McMahon character, and kind of showed some teasers from clips of what we were going to get. And yeah, again, it was a really cool episode. Wasn't as dark as the first episode. Wasn't as dark as the last episode, as episode 2. Concentrated more on storylines and kind of WCW and the Screwjob. They finished off the steroid trial in this one, but then yeah, it kind of just went on to kind of the mid-90s where the Monday Night War became a thing, and yeah, it was covered really well. And like, again, it was a really positive episode for me as far as like where the business was at the time. Episode 4 was Attitude. This again, perfectly named. It was all about the Attitude Era, and kind of showed little parts of the negativity of Vince McMahon, but like not to like the groundbreaking parts we get to in part 5 and 6. But no, we started off with finding out about Dr. Jerry Graham, who Vince McMahon was a big fan of when he was younger and kind of wanted to take inspiration from when he became the Vince McMahon character. I thought it was really cool, something I definitely did not know about going into this. So, and kind of seeing the clips they used and the way that Vince was explaining him, and like how this made like perfect sense to how he was inspired by him, and him saying that he doesn't like good guys, he only likes bad guys, makes almost spot on sense. Like, you would have assumed that beforehand anyway. And yeah, we started to cover the beginning of the Vince McMahon character becoming more prominent on TV, as well as the continuation of the Monday Night Wars and kind of the later parts and when WWE started to take over. We got a very, very deep dive into the history and rise of Stone Cold Steve Austin, which was very surprising. Like, only him and Hogan really got like a really deep dive into their careers and how they came up. Rock got one, but it was very, very skimmed over. Like, it was very quickly, he debuted, people didn't like him, he joined the Nation, he left the Nation, he became big star, done. I think it was very much a way of like, they wanted to go through the Rock stuff just so Rock would do the documentary, because like the Rock is obviously one of the biggest names in the world. So, of course they wanted him on board, but I think going through his career was just a way to like feed his ego, in my opinion. But that might just be me hating The Rock in general, so I don't know. But yeah, WWE again looked very naive when they showed, well, I don't know, it's kind of, I'll get to that in a minute. So they did the whole Iron Mike Tyson, bringing him in for WrestleMania 16, WrestleMania 15, no, WrestleMania 14, sorry, man, brain fart. how they brought him in for that, and the Michaels versus Stone Cold match. What made WWE look very naive is when they used a clip of a documentary used beforehand or an interview done beforehand by Stephanie McMahon, where she was like, "Oh, like he hasn't been arrested for the rape, has he?" And they were like, "Oh yeah." I was like, "Absolutely." Like, not they as in Netflix, whoever doing the interview, were like, "Yeah, he got done for that." That was the thing. And you're like, Stephanie didn't give an answer. She just looked very blankly into the camera. Like, again, looking very naive there. I wasn't aware of the Mike Tyson stuff. Like, when I went back and watched it at the time, I wasn't aware that he was getting done for anything like that. So for me, it looked like a very big risk, even though he's like one of the biggest names in the world at the time. Again, that kind of stuff is very risky to be bringing into the company, especially at a time when they needed people to be watching. But it obviously worked out very well. One of the best parts of the documentary is when Vince is asked about the similarities of Mr. McMahon, the character, and Vince McMahon, the person, and him and Shane saying, "Oh no, they're maybe a little bit similar, but overall, like, no, they're nothing the same." And it cut to bloody Shawn Michaels, Hulk Hogan, and Bruce Pritchard saying they are the same person, like completely going against what Vince and Shane said. And I think it was like one of the only times Bruce Pritchard was actually really honest in this thing. Like, Bruce Pritchard is a very unlikable person throughout this whole documentary, but we know this because he's a massive ass kisser of Vince McMahon. So we knew this anyway. Like, well, we as in wrestling fans know this anyway. So yeah, we quickly moved on from that, and they talk about kind of the fall of WCW and the rise of WWE after the Monday Night Wars came to an end, and Bischoff saying how McMahon essentially ripped off stuff that WCW was doing and did it better to a point where, like, yeah, they were inevitably going to win the war. They talk about the edgier product, definitely nicked that from WCW. Evil Boss Bischoff being taken and ripped off by Vince McMahon, the character. Yeah, I can see that as well to a certain point. Vince didn't deny anything, so I assume that he probably feels the same way as well. We very quickly went on to The Rock and all that kind of stuff, but I can give my opinion on that. McMahon saying that he doesn't see colour, according to The Rock, and to somebody else, I think it was Tony Atlas that said, "Oh, he doesn't see colour, he only sees cash." Bollocks. I do not believe that for a second. Like, for someone who has kind of watched it since 2006 and kind of gone back and watched the early 2000s stuff as well, ask Booker T whether Vince McMahon sees colour. And like, Booker T's in this as well, and he doesn't get brought up for this part. But yeah, no, Vince not seeing colour, I think, only depends on who that person is, and kind of like only really The Rock and Tony Atlas get asked. Whereas I feel like if you asked a broader amount of people of colour, they probably would disagree with that. And that is based on assumptions, but yeah, it does definitely come across that way. Like, I think it's bollocks. There's some of the Attitude Era I thought was really cool with clips, just constant clips for a few minutes. I feel like he's going to get people to go and watch that time, probably when all the WWE stuff comes to Netflix, or if they've already got the network or know someone who's got the network, they'll probably go watch that stuff. Very clever advertisement for the Attitude Era. And then yeah, we kind of go away from that and we cut to a part where well, one of the funnier parts of the documentary, where Vince is like talking about all this stuff that happened. He's like, well, it can't have been that edgy, you know, no one got killed, and then it cuts to a buried alive match and a casket match. Then it was like, no one got raped, and it cuts to Vince calling Triple H a rapist in 1999. And he says no guns and knives were used, and it cuts to Brian Pillman using a gun, and Kai and Tai with the choppy or pee moment. Yeah, the editor deserved a medal for doing that, because that was fantastic and so funny. The women were mentioned, you know, people like Sable, Jacqueline was shown on screen. Who else was shown? I can't remember what now. Deborah was shown on screen as well. And it's kind of like, yeah, again, you know, for someone who saw the early Ruthless Aggression era and kind of the end of the Attitude Era, I mean, in the minute I'm watching like old 2002 Monday Night Raw and SmackDown, and the stuff that the women are doing are crazy sometimes, and what they say about the women or say to the women is insane. And like, yeah, they probably get cancelled nowadays and all that stuff, and it is all about the times. So I kind of get that to a point. But then like, I think in the next episode they talk about Trish Stratus and the, you know, barking like a dog segment and all that stuff. And Trish even says like she did that knowing what the reaction would be, and we fell straight into our hands. That's the point of why they did it. So it's kind of a way of like, we don't or like, not a case that we don't know what, like, if, I don't know, it's hard to explain. It's kind of like, if they're okay with doing it, then like it shouldn't be massively ridiculed, but then if they're being forced to do it, then that's where the issues are. And like, I don't think we'll ever know the truth or whether or not, Sable were told to put the hands over her breasts for that segment, or the mud fighting thing, or the cat getting naked, or all this kind of stuff. We don't know. I don't think we'll ever know the truth about whether they were told to do that, whether they were forced to do that, or whether they wanted to do that. But, I mean, with Trish, I get it with the point of, that's the point of the reaction. That makes perfect sense. And that's fine. That kind of, it makes the segment feel less uncomfortable if Trish knows and Trish was aware of what the reaction was going to be, and that was the point of the segment. Whereas, we get to stuff like Sable in the next episode, I think, where they go through her lawsuit when she proclaims, like, where she says that she was forced to do stuff she didn't want to do, and that makes again sense with the stuff she was doing. So it's kind of like it's just an uncomfortable like situation, the whole thing, where like anyone can pretty much trip up and make a bad comment and stuff, and it is a terrible thing what they were doing to the women. And I'm so happy that we got past that, and that women's wrestling is seen as such a higher standard now, and like the women's revolution was huge, and I'm very happy it happened. So, some of the stuff is crazy, and like some people laugh about what they do, laugh about what they did now. But yeah, at the time, and like the allegations that had been made against Vince are awful. So, it's not great. And then, we kind of move on to an even worse moment where we have the sad and controversial part of the Owen Hart passing. And I'll be honest, the part that I partly agreed with was like when Brett said that, maybe they murdered him to get back to me, or they were embarrassing him to get to me. I feel like when Vince said that was all about Brett's ego, I can agree with that. I feel like that probably is the case. Obviously, I wasn't watching live at the time, but it just like, it does seem very petty if that was the case. And I can see Vince just being like, well, you left, like, we don't care about you. That I can agree with. However, the whole part of should the show have gone on, absolutely not. Like, are you stupid for you? Like, it was so silly having them go on. They just told the live crowd of what happened. Like, it was like, oh, they didn't see what happened. No, but they saw Owen on the floor, like, well, on the mat, being stretchered out. They saw blood on the mat afterwards. So, of course, they're going to suspect that something's happened. So, yeah, I mean, if Vince McMahon thinks the show should have gone on if he'd been splattered on the mat, as he said, then that's fair enough. But yeah, they shouldn't have done that, as essentially, well, no, pretty much that ring became a crime scene because Owen's blood was on it, and they had to kind of go to trial and stuff about it. And they kind of fucked the whole crime scene up by having a ton of people's DNA on it because people went out and wrestled. So yeah, that was a terrible thing to do, and it was just ridiculous, the fact that they like had the show go on. That shouldn't have happened. And then it kind of somberly goes into the teaser for the next episode, where they very lovely teased Chris Benoit, which I don't think gets mentioned until episode 6. But yeah, it kind of goes from one very big down to another very big down, and kind of episode 5 and 6 really, really do start to get into the nitty and gritty of kind of less human Vince McMahon is and more monster. So episode 5 is called Family Business, and for me this is kind of where we like start getting a bit uncomfortable. But it starts with Vince McMahon saying about throwing away the past and moving on and moving forwards. Ironic, 100%. Like, I found this quite laughable. Just, with everything going on now, with him to say back in 2021, oh, we'll just, stuff happens, it goes wrong from business standpoint, from personal standpoint, as in like from his very young past, to then just everything else, just, oh, it's in the past. I don't look back once, and it's like, oh, of course you don't look back, you little bastard. But then it moves on to Shane and Stephanie. It goes through Shane's kind of roles he's had in WWE beforehand, when he was an announcer, when he was a referee, when he became a character on television, and when he was actually wrestling. And it kind of does the same with Stephanie, but it kind of fast tracks her straight onto what she was doing storyline wise, whether it was being involved with Vince, the stuff with Test, the Undertaker abducting her and all that stuff. And I'm kind of shocked that she didn't mention that her best friend was Andre the Giant, because she always seems to mention that whenever she can. And then, yeah, it kind of goes through very quickly and explains the storyline, say, with the marriage to Test, and then how that went wrong, and she was drugged by Triple H and all that stuff, and then she turns heel. And yeah, I think it was and it shows like the infamous clip of, you know, Triple H interrupting the wedding and showing the video package, and yeah, it just goes through that really well, and it's like very quickly and organized, explains everything, and then goes to the next thing, that being like the most common used line in this whole last 3 episodes, which is, "It was a different time in our business." This was brought up when it was Stephanie McMahon and kind of the stuff that she was doing in the early 2000s. You know, she was, for example, showing a lot of skin, and there was clips of like when Steve Austin ripped her shirt, taking a box off her and stuff like that. And what I found with this and what came to mind is whether it was the late 90s, early 2000s of Stephanie, whether it was when she was GM of SmackDown, whether it was further on when she was part of the Authority with Triple H and Seth Rollins, etc. It's very easy to forget that Stephanie McMahon like is being booked by her dad. And you know, what comes to mind with that stuff is like this episode of SmackDown back in, I think it was 2003, where it starts on her legs, goes up to her ass, frames in on her ass, and then kind of pulls out so she addresses the camera. That was booked by her dad, and that just does come across, well, just a little bit fucked, to be fair. But you know, it was a different time, and I think it was so unnecessary. It didn't lead to anything. It didn't have anything to do with the programming at all. It was just there, and it's just a bit creepy. Yeah, they move on to the Vince versus Stephanie match at No Mercy, which is just insane. Like, even without the context that Stephanie was getting married to Triple H in 6 days after that, like, that match is incredibly weird to watch, and like, it's an uncomfortable watch as well. Just like the whole father-daughter thing. The fact he's choking her with a lead pipe and hitting her with a lead pipe, it's not a great watch for anyone who's not seen it. And then, yeah, we go back to like kind of what I referred to in the last part, which was the barking like a dog thing with Trish Stratus. It's an insane segment to watch now. And as I said, if Trish is like on board with it, she gets it. The whole point is getting the crowd to hate Vince more, but then he gets his comeuppance at WrestleMania. There's another time where he gets his comeuppance where he gets the Sting face from Rikishi. And yeah, we get the kind of the WrestleMania thing where he loses to Shane at WrestleMania, and Linda gets up, and the massive Linda pop and all that stuff is all very good. It is class A heel tactics. It's fantastic as a bad guy, but it's just the segment is just not funny like nowadays, whereas probably back then it was hilarious. And then we get to like a real low point when we get to Sable, and like when asked about her, and more to the point when he's asked about the lawsuits, he's like, "Oh, I don't remember anything about the lawsuit," which I think is bollocks. Like, if someone gets sued for $110 million, you never forget that. Like, that is a whole fuck ton of money. And yeah, just absolute bullshit from Vince McMahon that he's forgotten about it. And yeah, it was like, all I remember is that she came out to work, and it was like, and then they had her do stuff that again made her look bad, and that she also looked uncomfortable doing, which was like kissing him, and you know, I think she kisses that Gowan as well, and she was doing all this kind of very slaggish stuff to be doing. I only know because I've seen clips of it and stuff. I've gone back and watched those episodes of SmackDown. It's not great, but you know, the kind of worst part of it for me, especially for that little segment of the documentary, is when Vince is asked about his affair with Sable on screen. He kind of doesn't straight away separate story from real, or at least it doesn't seem like it. So he kind of goes, "Affair with who?" And they go, "Sable." And he goes, and he kind of looks away, and as if like, it made the impression he gave me is that there was actually a real life affair between them both. And then you kind of you hear Paul Heyman go, "Storyline," and then like the producer says storyline, and he just doesn't answer the question at all. He kind of just goes, "God," and then they move on from it very quickly. It's all very uncomfortable to watch and very awkward. It gave me the impression that there was actually a real life affair that people actually don't know about, or maybe some people know about, that they weren't supposed to know about or but because he's also done it on screen, they ask about it and it's all a bit of confusion, but it all just looks really bad on Vince. They then move on to talk about other business ventures, the WWF in New York, they had a casino, which I didn't even know they had, the XFL. I don't really know much about American football or any of that stuff, so I kind of don't have much to say about that one. We move on to John Cena, where... Oh, no, they don't. John Cena comes up in a bit. They move on to WrestleMania 18 for Rock versus Hogan, and the dynamic shift, the crowd reaction to the match, the kind of how they change from heel to babyface and babyface to heel. Yeah, definitely an all-time crowd. I feel very sorry for Triple H and Chris Jericho had to follow that. Dwayne says his number one top line, which was like, Rock, we love you, but we wanted Hogan. Like that he said previously in the documentary for WrestleMania 40, where he goes, oh, Rock, we love you, but we want Cody. Me and my brother have memed that to shit, like the whole Rock, we love you thing. Like, it's especially funny for me because I hate Dwayne like a lot. So like, and he ruins everything good. You know, I'm a John Cena fan. He fucked John Cena over at 28. Big CM Punk fan, fucked him over at Royal Rumble 13. You know, nearly ruined WrestleMania 40. I just do not like The Rock at all, really. Or at least the more recent versions of The Rock in WWE. So maybe it's just me being a prick towards that. I don't know. We move on to John Cena, who literally only talks about his debut and then how he became the Doctor of Thugonomics when he was rapping on the bus to Stephanie, which we all know about. But then, like, that's it. They don't talk about, like, the rise of John Cena, how he became one of the biggest stars to come out of WWE, probably since Austin and Rock, or maybe even since Hulk Hogan in a way. I'm surprised they didn't mention, you know, the whole, you know, Super Cena stuff, you know, how he was winning everything, how he's a 16-time world champion, nothing about that, literally just basic Thugonomics, and then they move on very swiftly back onto Vince McMahon punishing people and all that kind of stuff, which... To be fair, Trish gives a good example of when she was possibly punished for not wanting to make out with another female superstar, which I assume would have been Mickie James or Ashley, because that was the story at the time at WrestleMania 22 or 23, where she lost the Women's Championship and Mickie was doing the stalker gimmick. They did like do one kiss, but that was it. And it got me thinking of like other people who possibly got punished through storylines for rejecting stories or not wanting to do certain things. The ones that came to mind was Kurt Angle and Booker T, when Angle was just like, I want to have sex with your wife. Like, that was very random from Kurt Angle and very unlike his regular character to be doing that kind of stuff. That seemed like a punishment. You've got Stardust, and especially like the end of Stardust, more when Cody was either going to get released or when he quit. Like, that stuff was just him doing random bollocks for no reason. He suggested plans of doing him Stardust on one show, Cody Rhodes on the other. Completely rejected that. I don't know whether like the Stardust stuff was a not Stardust like to begin with, but near the end it was kind of like a punishment thing to just keep him on doing it. And one that kind of a more infamous one where you had The Rock and Lana backstage, when Lana may or may not have been punished for showing that she got engaged to Rusev during a storyline when they were supposed to be against each other, and they had like, it was The Rock say that he cheated on Rusev, and Rock saying that she cheated on Rusev when she didn't. You know, that was just so silly and like really cynical from Vince if he got them to do that. Yeah, that moves on to the idea of Vince McMahon fathering the child of Stephanie McMahon, or Shane doing the same. They don't mention the Shane part, but I've heard reports and seen multiple videos where they talk about Shane being the alternative idea. Yeah, that is just beyond comprehension of how fooked that is. That is just awful. And like, you know, did Vince have a crush on Stephanie? It would not shock me if that was the case, because he has shown on many occasions that he kind of probably did, and that is very, very creepy and weird. And then yeah, we kind of finished the episode off with going back to Shane McMahon, kind of going for like that full circle moment where they talk about his return, they talk about him leaving the company. I mean, I've kind of done that wrong. They talk about kind of him and his feud with Vince again, but then kind of behind the scenes feud. Heyman tells this like awful story of how Vince was like, I hate this idea that he's got, and he'd have to kill him to kind of get the idea over, and it kind of challenges manhood a bit, and it's just very uncomfortable to just imagine like your father saying that to you, let alone like having some like just it being in a booking meeting or something, or like being after a booking meeting is just a bit crazy, to be fair. And then yeah, they talk about like the return and how after the match at WrestleMania 32 in 2016, kind of Vince kind of was more loving towards him again and kind of like more vulnerable. I'm not going to say vulnerable, but more just loving in general towards Shane, which is a nice way to think, but it was like a really sad story to get to that point, and you got a feel for Shane afterwards. And then yeah, we kind of get another teaser into the next episode, which is all about the recent allegations, which we'll talk about more in the kind of final part of this video. But yeah, as a overall one, it was really good. Again, it started to kind of get uncomfortable with Vince's more I don't know, creepy booking towards Stephanie, the uncomfortableness towards Sable, the kind of stuff that doesn't work with some business stuff, which I didn't really get. But yeah, you kind of can see where this is kind of going downhill a bit, especially when it comes, as I said, to Sable and to certain booking. But yeah, I just know that the next episode is just going to be a whole load of uncomfortable because, you know, Chris Benoit and that gets brought up and it's just not great. But I'll give you my reaction to that in the next part, which we'll go to now. And finally, we had episode 6, the finish, or more like he's finished. No, like it starts with Vince talking about the computers in his brain, or his brain's like a computer. There's 3 of them. It's, my god, it's fucking weird. Like, it was like, well, it was a weird way to start the like most controversial episode of the series. And you know, he goes like, well, the first computer is talking to you now. The third one like goes away somewhere and he could get it, but you don't want to. And the third one's probably thinking about sex or something. And it's like, I don't even want to know what the third one's thinking about if that's where you're going with that. It's just weird. It was just like, what on earth is going on here? They swiftly go away from that and they talk about the Battle of the Billionaires at WrestleMania 23, and kind of, I was 8 at the time. I didn't care for any of the Vince McMahon and Donald Trump stuff. I was more for Bobby Lashley versus Umaga. I get now in retrospective why it was a big draw and all that stuff. That's all I have to say on it. The whole politics stuff with Donald Trump, I am not involved in because A, I'm not in America, and B, I don't get involved with politics. So then we move on to 2007, which is obviously the Chris Benoit stuff, and yeah, it gets really real, really uncomfortable, really quickly. And yeah, it does like a sort of short recap of the Vince McMahon appreciation night and the limo exploding, and then him turning up on the next Raw and explaining what's happened. Well, not explaining what happened, just saying that Benoit's passed away and that, you know, that show is going to be a memorial for him. I'm not going to talk through I'm not going to talk through what happens and everything with that, because we all know it's not, you know, it's common knowledge at this point if you're a wrestling fan, which most people are watching the channel. So like, and if you don't know, go look it up and stuff, because I'm not going to go for it. It's uncomfortable, it's bad, it's tragic, it's but yeah, like it was one of the lowest points in WWE and pro wrestling in general's history. I liked that they brought in Christopher Nowinski, who's been known to go through the CTE stuff and kind of goes through and explains all that kind of stuff, which is always insightful for anyone who like doesn't know. I watched again the Dark Side of the Ring documentary on it, so I kind of have an idea of what Christopher Nowinski was doing and all that stuff, and I'm glad they got him in for the Netflix documentary. I'm fucking slurring words terribly, and I don't drink. But yeah, the CTV is awful. Hogan comparing it to a wrist lock. I understand he's trying to tell us what working is. It's just a terrible example. Plus, there's like video evidence that Benoit definitely just smashes his head into people. You know, there's a reason why Bryan Danielson, but at the time Daniel Bryan, stopped doing it, and they literally show footage of Benoit being dropped straight on his face. So, you know, it like everything they said was just absolute bollocks. I didn't understand how Vince McMahon said that like he thought it was a work, but then put money into proving it wasn't a work. It was like, really bizarre, like how they went about it. But Steve Austin, Jesus Christ, like saying that like he doesn't essentially believe in CTE and it's just bad wrestling. Like everyone knows Chris Benoit was not a bad wrestler, and yeah, it was just, I don't know. It was like a stupid part of that, and he said that he's not a CTE guy, but then like he touches the back of his ear. Why does he do that? Is it a tell? Is he showing that he's lying? Is he trying to tell us that that's what he's been told to say? I don't know. It's weird. And yeah, Stone Cold's incredibly naive for saying that if he truly does believe what he's been saying. The people dying under the age of dying under the age of 45 is a really good question, but it kind of depends on the circumstances. On the screen, they showed a newspaper article where they showed like multiple wrestlers and what years they died and like what age they were and stuff. Two of them on there was Andre the Giant and Owen Hart, who had nothing to do with like painkillers and steroids and stuff. I'm pretty sure Andre the Giant was because his organs weren't growing correctly because he was a bloody giant. And Owen Hart, as we previously spoke about, fell from like 50 feet or whatever. Like that wasn't a painkiller thing either. So I don't know. It's kind of like it's like a controversial topic because like, you know, there's evidence against it, there's evidence for it and all that other stuff. But it led into them explaining that like they brought in a reduced schedule, the wellness policy was brought in, they removed certain moves. Obviously the chair shot to the head was the big one that was used that the Undertaker got face on about, but he understands why. But you know, Undertaker's one of his things is a fucking brutal chair shot to the head. Now that he's done to Shawn Michaels, Randy Orton, Mr. Kennedy, they first come to mind. And then yeah, we're staying on Undertaker. We go up to, and there's like a massive jump of time. They like completely skip like 10 years or something. And they go to WrestleMania 30, where the streak ended, and they talk about how the decision was made on the day, which I fully believe. You know, and everyone has their opinions on it. I did think at the time that Lesnar was going to win. I have Facebook proof that I thought that as well. But yeah, it was the thing that got me was Vince McMahon saying that it was shock traumatization, if that's a word, that Undertaker couldn't remember the match with Brock. Like essentially he was saying he was so sad he was going to lose the streak that he just forgot the match happened, which is utter crap. And also, if Vince didn't think he got concussed, why did he go to the hospital with him? Like, you know, it doesn't make any sense. He's very contradicting in what he's saying. Like, it's fine if Undertaker did get a concussion, but I don't get why Vince was saying that he didn't and that it was because he was sad. It was very bizarre why they went with that. They then moved on to like a bunch of different stuff. It was to do with Stephanie and Triple H and Shane McMahon again, talking about the stuff which I've kind of covered Shane already. But talking about his match with Kurt Angle in 2001, which is a brutal match, and I'd suggest probably go watching it. They talk about business stuff and how Triple H and Stephanie McMahon were probably going to take over the business, and that Vince, Triple H, and Stephanie are like the three figureheads for a while. And they slightly went into give Divas a chance, which I feel like probably should have been talked about more, but isn't. So that's a bit of a shame. They talk about Peacock and the network and all that kind of business stuff, which again is just like, I don't really have an opinion on it because it's just fact, it's what happened. But what I do have an opinion on is when they start talking about WWE creating new stars. Because the people they brought onto the screen, I think I've missed a couple, but they brought up CM Punk, Batista, Randy Orton, and Roman Reigns. No women. No Becky Lynch, no Bella Twins, no Charlotte Flair. You know, all massive stars when they were there, like especially Becky and Charlotte, you know, main event at WrestleMania. They probably didn't put Ronda on there because of, you know, she was a big star before coming in. But Charlotte and Becky should have been in that list. And I know it's like a small thing, but it's still important the fact they actually get the women. You know, they can't talk about how women were fucking ridiculed and fucking, what's the word I'm for, like lowered on the card and treat like shit, and then not bring them in when, you know, they need to be boosting themselves up a bit. Like even when it came to showing about WrestleMania 39, WrestleMania 40, again, no sign of women. They were showing Cody and Roman like for both times, and it's just like little stuff like that. It's like, can't we just bring the women in, have them get a good showing in this, because they've had a fucking terrible showing so far because of fucking Vince McMahon's a bastard. But yeah, that was a bit of a shame. they were they they then asked him about retirement, which, you know, is just coincidentally massively ironic and kind of funny. Him saying that, you know, people who should fucking retire should die. You know, that's just lovely and ironic in it, really. But I do wonder how Booker did survive the nuclear bomb and how all of us did. And then straight after that, it goes to Vince stepping down, the recent allegations, you know, his appearances on Raw and SmackDown when he was trying to say, like, fuck you to all the allegations that were going on, which then led to fucking him stepping down and retiring, then coming back again to sell the company, and kind of, I'm not going to go through all the allegations because, you know, again, we're wrestling fans. We know all the allegations that have happened. I don't need to tell you. You probably don't want to hear it again because it is vulgar, it is vile, it is awful, and there's just fucking, it's all crap and just disgusting. So, you know, I don't want to go through it again. I'm sure you don't want me to either. They have Bruce Pritchard come in, and I'm kind of I kind of lost the timeline in my notes, I'm not going to lie. Well, they had Bruce Pritchard come in, and he kind of, as a more recent thing, I don't even think it was January this year, and I think they said it was. And they said, what do you think of the documentary? And he thought it was a got you piece. They thought they made him look like an asshole. He said he wasn't enough humanity. And like, one of the first things I thought of episode 1 is that they made Vince look more human than I think I've ever seen him. So I kind of don't believe him on that from my personal perspective. They brought up the Ashley Massaro stuff, which is fucking horrible to hear, and just, you know, just doesn't make any sense as to why they wouldn't do anything about that. And yeah, one thing that massively stuck out to me through all this, and I know a lot of people have said this as well, Brock Lesnar got mentioned in the second round of allegations by, I can't remember what the lady's name was, but, you know, he got mentioned by name in this documentary that he was part of this fucking awful stuff that happened. One person didn't get mentioned, John Laurinaitis. Fucking Mr. People Power himself fucking didn't get mentioned at all during this. He was shown on screen like twice through clips, but not intentionally. And yeah, he just like was never mentioned, and he was like the second biggest bastard in this whole allegation thing. So I don't understand why they've left him out but put Vince and Lesnar in. You know, they were, all three of them were like the biggest people to do with it. But yeah, and then they move on to kind of complimenting WWE on their success since Vince has gone away, and kind of the Netflix deal, and, you know, record breaking attendances and money and all that stuff since 2002, which is great. And I feel like that's where the kind of reason this has come out comes in, but I'll talk about that in a little while. And then they ask people what Vince's legacy will be, which a lot of people can't actually answer, and I don't, because I feel like they're going to answer, well, it's more just the allegation is going to be his thing. I think that Shoemaker guy said, yeah, it's just the allegation. That'll be his legacy now. Like, anything good he did has been absolutely screwed over now by the fact that all this crappy things he's done, which I agree with. I feel like the first thing people are going to think, which is essentially what a legacy is all the fucking awful things he's done. You know, the text messages that are fucking vile, you know, all these allegations going on. That's going to be his legacy, unfortunately. And like, if you're willing to see past that, yes, he'll be down as like the biggest guy in wrestling ever, because, you know, I wouldn't be sat here talking about wrestling if it wasn't for him. You know, all the content I watch on YouTube wouldn't be around because it's all wrestling stuff, and it's because of him. You know, all the stuff we do is because of him. AEW wouldn't be a thing because of him. So it's kind of like going into all that stuff. But yeah, no, he's absolutely finished. Like, legacy wise, anything is just going to be about these awful allegations, which is kind of what he deserves for doing all that terrible shit. So yeah, I feel like it was kind of finished on a not great note. They tried to like boost him up again for legacy and stuff, but it didn't really work because that's all people are going to think about as I've gone through. But yeah, I mean, WWE is doing massively well now. It's very much enjoyable since he's gone. Hogan saying that he doesn't think that the company will survive without Vince is naive, because Triple H is fucking great, and if Stephanie's still around, or if she isn't, we don't know. She's been doing like really good stuff for the company as well. So, you know, it kind of like depends on what your opinions are on like whether WWE will carry on with it well without Vince. But we've had a very, very good indication that will be the case. So, yeah, like as I say, the episode 6 overall is just very uncomfortable. It's very hard to watch at times, you know, through the Benoit stuff at the beginning, through to the allegation stuff at the end. It's just like an uncomfortable sitting experience, but it's all stuff that, again, needs to be addressed and kind of, you know, does prove that kind of Vince McMahon is an absolute bastard overall. But, you know, I don't know. It's kind of like, it's hard. I want to try and end this bit on a fucking positive, and you just can't. It just sucks massively. So overall, what did I think of the documentary? In conclusion, like, I thought it was really good. I really much enjoyed it. I feel like Netflix never failed to put on a good documentary. But yeah, as a watch, it was enjoyable, apart from like the last episode, which was slightly more uncomfortable. But it was really insightful. Like, there was stuff that I didn't know that I got to learn through this. And yeah, I think the timing of the release, you know, 200 and a bit months, maybe 3 months before WWE goes on to Netflix, I don't think that is a coincidence. I feel like it's them trying. It's almost like Damage Control, like not the group, the actual Damage Control, where like they're trying to tell you about the bad shit, so then they can release better shit when it comes onto Netflix. Pretty much, it's like, I don't know. It's a good way of doing it, and it's like a, you know, they're kind of airing the bad, so then people can understand that. He's not around anymore, so actually it's not going to be so bad. So you actually can come and watch this, and it'll be really good. And, you know, come watch Raw on Monday. But yeah, I mean, I call them highlights, but like some of the people that I thought were really good during this were like Triple H. I thought that at times he was decent and like really put some good input in. Bret Hart was really funny throughout. I can't lie. Like, he doesn't have any charisma, but the stuff he was saying was hilarious, and they're constantly trying to put himself over was just really funny. Dave Meltzer had really good input throughout, and kind of what's the word now? He kind of just had a counter for everything they were saying. Like, he would like just tell the truth, undoubtedly. But Tony Atlas was just fantastic, I thought. Like, even with the awful things that Patterson did to him, like, he was, and like that little part, everything else was just like, he was just really entertaining. I don't know why I found him entertaining, but apart from that small part with the whole fucking groping shit, he was just really entertaining throughout. But there were some people that I thought we probably could have heard of, and there's probably reasons why they weren't on here. I just would have preferred seeing them. And you got the case of like Mick Foley, I would like to hear from. Kevin Nash, Edge would have been really good for this, I feel like, because he lived through a lot of the eras. You know, and got to think about it, this was made in 2021, so Edge would have been in the company. So I feel like those would have been in. I would have liked to have heard more from John Cena and Booker T. I feel like they didn't really say much, which I was very surprised about when it came to John Cena. And yeah, I would have liked to see more women come onto it. I know that Stephanie was on it, but she didn't really count as far as like wrestlers go. As far as wrestlers, we only really had Trish and Wendy Richter really talk. No one else really comes to mind when it came to women wrestlers. I felt like we could have maybe got some other people in from different eras, but other than that, I feel like they got some good people in. Obviously, Rock, Austin, Michaels, Cena. Even though we could have heard more from him. Bret Hart was insightful. But yeah, I say, as for target market, I think for wrestling fans, it was kind of going over what we already knew and then just adding stuff on, especially for myself, you know, with a lot of stuff that I didn't know were like before my time, stuff like the Wendy Richter stuff, and like more details into like who Hulk Hogan is and like who Vince is and stuff like that. But I feel like for me, I'd be very interested to see what like a non-wrestling fan's perspective is. I have one of my best mates is like, he only really watches wrestling when I watch wrestling. Like, he'll ask me to show him stuff, or I'll offer to show him stuff, and he really enjoys it. So he's like more of a casual fan. But like, I'd be interested to get his point of view on it. I think like I'll probably show him at some point, and like, even if like, I don't know, I kind of feel like if me and him did a video, if you guys wanted, if you want to leave a comment down below of like a wrestling fan and non-wrestling fan's perspective of the documentary, we could do that. But yeah, I'm interested in what he has to say on it, and kind of, because he doesn't know the history and everything, and like, it doesn't feel like a lot of old typical Vince, you know, kind of stuff, how he takes the documentary and what's said and what he's done. But yeah, I said overall, as a watch itself, very much enjoyed it. I definitely suggest going and watching it if you haven't. And yeah, I kind of hope there's like a part 2 to it that comes out once all the Janelle Grant stuff happens, and what kind of proceeds of the other lawsuit that's going on, the criminal investigation one, and kind of we come back to it if Vince is like still able to do all this stuff. If he wants to, I doubt he'll even want to talk about the stuff afterwards, but you know, kind of doing a part 2 to this and seeing like what happens after all the allegations have kind of happened and the lawsuits have happened, and we kind of have that aftermath of it, if you will. But yeah, so do put down in the comments below what you thought of the documentary. Like, did anything stick out to you? Is there anything I've said that might have ruffled feathers that I might have been wrong on? But any feedback from me in general, and yeah, just, you know, just your opinions on the documentary itself would be great. And you know, do like and subscribe if you like the video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you later.